Okay, so thanks for joining us today. We're going to be interviewing the artist Bob and Roberta Smith for the Artists Make Change project, which is hosted by Airspace Gallery and made as an AN project led by the Artists Council of AN. So in this whole kind of project, we're talking with lots of different artists and arts organisers and arts organisations about how artists might make change. And it's very much my pleasure and Glenn's pleasure to have Bob and Roberta Smith with us here today. Bob, could you give us a little intro to yourself and your practice?
Well, it's complicated, long, shaggy dog story. But as you say, I'm an artist. I work under this pseudonym of Bob and Roberta Smith, which we could address later or not. But I have been doing for about 30 years. And I work in London. I teach at London Metropolitan University, and I make all sorts of different sorts of things. But I suppose people might associate me with kind of placards, and through that think about electioneering or politics or something. I stood against Michael Gove in 2015 in the election to advocate the arts, and I organised something called the Art Party around that time, and that's me. We're in my studio, which is the Leytonstone Centre of Contemporary Art, which is actually a sort of reasonably sized shed in my garden that I designed and built a long time ago as a kind of gallery space. But as you see, it's long turned into the function of lots of sheds. It's got some things for doing gardening, but I do work in here as well during the summer months.
And it's not a public gallery space anymore, then, Bob?
No. Well, if I'm absolutely frank, it was never really a public space. It was a space to do things and show things and to show artists that I liked. And we did. It was at a time. It's a bit difficult. This sounds pompous and stupid, but I probably wouldn't want the public traipsing through my house these days. But like 20 years ago when we did it, I did try and get the public to come, and certainly artists invited. Like lots of openings, people invite their friends and all of that sort of thing. So it was a genuinely it was a semi-public space, really, I suppose. And it was great. We did shows with Lothar Gertz, Matthew Collins. We did a big group show with artists from Manchester and London with Mark Wallinger and Anna Barraball. And it was quite a focus for activity for a while. And then at the Mead Gallery, we created 3 of the Leytonstone Centre of Contemporary Arts. And I showed Ron Hazlett, and Villa de Barlow actually exhibited a wedge and put a wedge right underneath it at the Mead Gallery, which was great, and then had her students making these charcoal drawings inside. And Ron Hazlett showed at the latest. And at the moment in Coventry, there's the CCCA, which they took from the Mead Gallery, and they use it as a gallery to exhibit zines in. And we did it, and I showed. We recreated it as well at the Serpentine Gallery. So it's been like a kind of mad TARDIS over the years, and I hope to do things with it in the future.
Well, yeah,
I'm not in my garden at that point, though. We might lift it out somehow.
I think so many artists and organisations are really looking forward to when that might be possible again at the moment as well. So, same time. So we've got, as Rachel was saying, we crowdsourced some questions for you, Bob. So we wanted to bring in some questions from all over the country of people who know your work and are interested. And we've asked them to pose the questions that we're going to be posing to you today. So I think if it's okay with you, we should kick off with question number 1, which came in by email from Diana Ali. And Diana asks, would you describe yourself as a reactionary or a radicalist, or neither?
I wouldn't describe myself as a reactionary, although I suppose I did think a lot about this question, actually, because it makes you think about what people might think about you. You know, it's another person's view of you, and I was thinking about, I'm a Royal Academician and I have an OBE, so I've accepted this these two kind of awards, if you like, from the establishment. And one thing I really think very clearly is that the establishment in Britain is over all the time that it's existed, is a really pernicious thing. It normalizes so many things, from slavery to low wages and all of these things. So then why would I accept awards from them? And I think in the end the reason is because I'm trying to advocate arts education, really, and I suppose I've been given those kinds of awards by people in the establishment who want to see some sort of change. So it makes me a bit more powerful, to be absolutely honest. So there's that kind of thing, and then there's also the thing that I see myself not as a wildly radical artist, but if you don't see yourself as some kind of sort of innovator at the edges of things, there isn't a lot of point in making art, really. You have to be trying to push the boundaries of it forward. So, I would like to think of my aspects of what I do as quite radical. I mean, I think that they can be formal things. I mean, a lot of what I think about when I'm in the studio is relationships between, imagery and meaning and colours and text, and I think Matisse was quite a radical artist, So it's this. So, but also I think about trying to get people to think about how you can make art in a Socratic way rather than a Platonic way. In sitting and looking at the world and making a critique of it, and the more harsh your critique of the world, the more radical you might consider yourself to be. But I'm not really in that camp. I'm much more a kind of Socratic person. I want to make things that talk directly to people. That can be a problem in the contemporary art world because people don't like art that tells them things very straight. They want to be able to have space to think about art, and that's quite right. I do make art that's like that sometimes, but so I think that idea of trying to be a Socratic artist in the middle of things, trying to engage with politics, trying to engage with people I don't agree with, but also try and show solidarity with people I do agree with. I think in that way, that is quite a radical stance in the art world. Being radical in the art world is not a difficult thing to do. It's an extremely conservative domain, and it's conservative conceptually, and it's conservative with a small c in terms of the kind of artists that it accepts and the kinds of artists that it promotes. It promotes its children, essentially. and I don't think that's good, So in that sense, I am, trying to be a radical person, to say, look, art is not complicated. Anybody can get engaged in making art, and that's an important thing to do for democracy and human rights and all these kinds of issues. So in that sense, I do see myself as a radical person, but I'm a radical person who's a Royal Academician and OBE. So it's a world of contradictions and grey areas, I suppose.
And I guess it's how you use those privileges, Bob. So
well, they are privileges, and they are, and I really think I think it's good. I think it's really good that the honour system supports artists. I think it's great, but it shouldn't have any relationship with the empire. I mean, that seems nuts. It should be, like the Legion of Honor or something, or it should be like it is all completely nuts. But when you go and get that award, you realise that you're there with, long-standing people who've been working in the NHS and soldiers who've lost limbs, and you realise actually it's a bit. Although the empire thing is absolutely appalling, the idea of a nation sort of saying, is a meaningless piece of tin or an award is not such a bad thing. So it's, anyway, I'm genuinely conflicted about it. I understand people who would reject it. I mean, I think that's totally understandable.
Well, thanks for that, Bob. Rach?
Yeah, I guess this kind of picks up a little bit where you're getting to about motivation for your work. So this is a question from Heziba McLeod on Twitter, and they say, what motivates you most on a personal level? Is it the belief that you can make change? Or is it anger or the desire to empower and inspire others to join the fight?
Yeah, there's lots of things to say to that. I mean, it's all of those things. It's, the thing that motivates me to make art and, make this art, which is kind of, quite didactic, I suppose, is my parents' experience and how they got into art. So, I was quite a privileged kid in a way. My parents were artists. Every meal we had was put on the table because my parents were good at drawing. So I've never, in my gut, understood the idea that art is a sort of a kind of add-on to life or a hobby. That's never been in my gut understanding. I can see why people think that, but I don't come from that sort of territory, which is weird. I can see for most people that is just weird. But how my parents got into art is the thing that I find genuinely sort of really inspiring. They were good at drawing. My mother was a great draftsperson, and she got into art. The thing that turned her on to art was really when she was a child and she was drawing, and when she should have been studying at school. And in those days, in the 30s, the schoolroom was heated with a real fire, heating the room, and the teacher took her drawing that she was doing in this exercise book, I guess, and threw it in the fire. And when you're told that story as a child, that's powerful. You realise that there's some kind of power beings have by drawing that people can be frightened by, and so that was very powerful. My dad was a great draftsperson, and I never really had the conversation with him. I wish I did about what really turned him on to making art, but he was he was a working class bloke working in a Blue Band margarine factory, and I guess through making drawing, maybe a teacher or somebody or a family member said you should take that more seriously, and he went to art school at 14, I think, to study. Both my parents went to art school to study. The gateway drug was graphics, I suppose, for working class people. They would study graphics and you could get a job. And anyway, the idea that so through their lives, if you like, I sort of just had an understanding. I just thought it was normal that anybody who was interested in art could, get involved in art, make art, go to art school, and then live a life and fund their family through making art. So it's that's weird, isn't it? But that is my experience. But the But I've wanted. Yeah. I mean, this turns into a long shaggy dog story, but then I went to a large comprehensive school, fantastic art facilities. It was slightly mad school. I was quite conflicted how I think about it now, but it was certainly built to teach. There were screen printing facilities. There was a dark room, lots of great teachers to teach you stuff, and so all that was great. But the thing that really sort of made me, I mean, lots of things have angered me politically, but the thing that where politics really intruded on my own life was in 2011 when Michael Gove came up with the EBAC. And I realised at that point that there was a group of people who just didn't understand that a sort of universality about learning art was important. And then I think about the institutions that I've been involved with. The large secondary with its crystal windows and modernist design that I went to school with, this comprehensive school, that is no more. Chelsea School of Art on Manresa Road, which was where my dad worked. Chelsea School of Art still exists, but it's in an army barracks. It was in a purpose-built art school, which was designed around the time that my father was working there. That has gone, and it's all covered in kind of fake Tudor housing now. And then the building that I taught in at London Metropolitan University, the university under a different vice-chancellor, sold that. God knows what that's going to become. So I've seen this kind of erosion of both the buildings, the means, the funding, the people who teach art over, the last 10, 15 years. And that does make me really angry. And I think it's stupid and it damages all sorts of things. Might come to in other questions, I suppose. But so anyway, there's two reasons there, really. I could go on and on and on about why I'm interested in making work and making statements. But key to me is my slightly weird upbringing by having these two art educationists as my parents. And then my own experience has been working in education, I suppose, and seeing it all being eroded and monetized. And I'm worried about that, and will continue to speak out about that.
Thanks, Bob. And I guess that that you touched on it there. Your work within education, but also this thing about Michael Gove and the EBAC. You talked about a universality of art and that it belongs to everybody, and that's about empowerment, I guess.
Yeah, I know, it's absolutely right. I've been back in 2011. I was trying to advocate the arts in any which way I could come up with, and the idea sort of 5-6 years ago was that the arts are a big economy. And so you're trying to talk to conservative politicians who are interested in the economy about the importance of the economy of the arts, and I was part of that. But then I thought all the way along that actually that's not the story, and and then I've been involved in things with the charity Index on Censorship, and I worked with them on a couple of projects. And when you saw, kind of Ai Weiwei being imprisoned, and poets in the Middle East being locked up, and poets in Somalia being locked up, it then became about saying, well, it's okay to talk about the arts as a powerful engine of the economy, which I think it is, but actually it's a human right. And we're lucky in this country. We don't generally tread on artists. There might be limitations to what people feel they can say or get away with. But in countries around the world, increasingly, artists are being locked up. And so that gave me the thing if you then think art is a human right, it's not a human right just for artists. It's a human right for everybody. Free speech and access to degrees of freedom. So that aspect of art has been that's been a big motivation. Yeah.
And I guess leads nicely on to question number 3, which came in from Sarah Males via Twitter, and digs into the artwork itself, I guess. So she asks, your work often includes a call to action. When that action is taken, do you still consider that as part of your artistic process, or does the actor of that action who makes that decision, does it become their artwork?
Well, I've got a very clear answer to that. It's never my artwork. I don't want to appropriate other people's activity, even if they're, maybe inspired by what I do. My whole thing has been about, I had a book published years ago called Make Your Own Damn Art. Don't expect me to do it. I genuinely, one of the things, somebody said to me the other day that I was the most, that they saw that my art in classrooms the most of any other contemporary artist, because a quick way to get to an idea about it is for kids to come up with a slogan and paint it in illogical bright colours, and that's slightly. I'm very flattered by that, but it slightly dismays me, because I kind of think the whole point about making about art education is that you kind of give people permission to come up and have their own ideas, and I certainly. I definitely don't. And actually, I'm kind of very old-fashioned in that sense. I went for a period of having lots of assistants making work for me, but actually it didn't really look like my work. It was too slick. They did it too properly. They followed the rules in their own heads. They couldn't follow the rules in my head, So I'm definitely somebody who thinks that you and actually agency of any artist comes from themselves. That it's a moment. There's a kind of moment, isn't there, where you kind of say, like riding a bicycle, I can do this. You take the stabilizers off and you're away, So I definitely don't want to. I definitely see it not as that. Even these things with the like the Leytonstone Centre of Contemporary Art. It's great when people tell me about it, and I'm very flattered and everything. And I think that's part of the. You're throwing a pebble into a pond, and you hope it makes ripples. And so that's great to hear about the ripples. But I don't want to own any of that. or I suppose maybe that's a generational thing, copying tapes and listening to music, and and having, reproducibility should be free. I think pretty much. Not always, but where it's possible. Yeah. Have I answered that? I got a bit lost with thinking what the first part of that question was, but no, it's definitely run with it.
Yeah. I think that's great, Bob. Thank you. I've got a little kind of change in tone, possibly, from a question from Simon Fell, who says, a lot of us have been campaigning hard for the last few years against political changes that have turned out in the worst possible way. How can we recover from all the political reversals of the last 12 months and persevere both as individual artists and as members of the society in an ongoing crisis? And here he says as well, he's not talking about COVID-19 as the crisis.
Yeah. Well, I think I'm definitely somebody who thinks that your agency or your right to speak out about things or political issues or whatever it is comes from sort of close inspection and working, and it's a bit of a work ethic kind of idea. But I think you just have to carry on. You know, part of making change is not rhetorical. It's not about shouting from the rooftops or coming up with a glib slogan, joining a party, or throwing mud at the opposition. It's about trying to do things which are good things, you know, and you can do that in difficult times. You can, even when you know, in ghastly situations, you see. I mean, I don't think we are in a totally shit situation, but you know, you see people on the ground in Beirut or something, or one of my big heroes, David Knott. You know, this surgeon. You know, he goes into these dark situations and does what he can because he has knowledge. And actually, sometimes in difficult situations, you need. You know, what's really needed is knowledgeable people who can sort of do good. And I think we can all do that. You know, we can all do that whenever things turn bad. And I think that's a kind of hopeful thing to say. So there is, and also one thing about it is from one generation to the next generation, you have to say, although things may look grim, you know, there is hope, there is a future, there are things that you can do. And it's lots of people doing things in small ways that affects change, actually, unless you're going to become, you know, a leader of a political party, God forbid. But actually it is, you know, nurses and doctors and key workers and can be artists, you know, doing good things, working with people, changing the situation on a local level that can affect change. So I think there is a lot of hope around, actually. I've got here we go. Keep making art, mate, Simon. That would be my key thing. You know, it's art in that sense stands for ingenuity and innovation and curiosity and willingness to think about things differently.
Thanks for that, Bob. And I think there's a really important message there which underpins a lot of what we're doing with this project is, you know, finding ways to carry on seems ever more important. Next question, Deborah Robinson, who I know you might know. From New Art Gallery Walsall days.
She's a wonderful person.
Yeah, such a great organisation, and I know you worked a bit there with the Garman Ryan collection. But also, one of the things that organisation is known for is how it engages with the young people of the town. And Deb's question is really concerning early career artists and talking about your role as an educator. She asks, it's always been a challenge for early career artists to develop their practice and to access opportunities. Given the current climate, have you got any advice you might offer?
It's very difficult. I think things are really difficult for artists and for students. I mean, I can't overemphasize the difficulties because of the possibilities of, you know, getting spaces to work, getting the money and to buy the time to make work, and the gig economy and all that stuff. You know, you'd think that might open things up and give access to funds to do things, but it tends to swallow up everybody's time. Everybody's time is spent online. There's less time to think, you know, and so that time kind of alone to kind of come up with ideas or to work in an ensemble way, I think that is really complicated. I think there are some weird, this may sound really glib, I don't quite believe it myself actually, but there is an idea at the moment, you know, with the COVID-19 thing that, you know, there's the you know, like the office market is going to be, I think there's a big land grab going on actually during COVID-19. But one of the things that is happening is that there will be, unfortunately, lots of physical space which nobody will be able to afford. And it may be that people can get into those kinds of spaces on short-term leases and things, And I think that there's always ways of doing things in a different way. If you're prepared to accept that you're not going to walk down the well-trodden path of the previous generation, then things can kind of open up for you. But don't underestimate the problems there. I think one thing to really think about is the agency of art to be a positive force for change, and to think about it in those terms, to think about yourself as a sort of Socratic artist, if you like, so you can kind of get involved and make collaborative practices. One of the things that I've been really impressed with over the last few years is kind of Open School East in Margate. And Open School East set itself up as a kind of, high-end kind of art educative thing, in a way, could be like compared with, in terms of innovation or something, with like CalArts or Goldsmiths or something like that. So you've got very, very ambitious people wanting to work in that environment. But then they set up in Cliftonville in Margate, which is kind of bonkers, which is one of the most poor areas in the country. And they were troubled by all these kids on the street, wanting to, well, it's an art school, can't we come in? And they were going, no. And then they realized, yes, they can come in. And they sort of set up an environment to work with those young people. And that's remarkable, that, and that's a instance where, in a way, a rarefied, if you like, kind of, an idea about art where people are trying to think about things in a vanguardish way, worked in a really grassroots way. And I think that relationship is really important, something between thinking about things which are on the edges and fringes of innovation, but then also thinking about things in a very grassroots way. I think that's what Artist Newsletter has always been about, hasn't it, in a way? And I think that is, that's key to how one should operate, or how one could operate, and be, and have some measure of, success in terms of making change, I think.
Yeah, it's really great. And thinking about that sense of collectivity, bringing that forward, that sense of working as collective.
I think it's always the case, especially with people who go to art school. I don't think you need to go to art school to make art as well. That's the other thing. But I think the thing about that is that it's always your contemporaries who are going to be leaders, if you like, within your own particular generation, and they're always going to be the case. So if you attempt to mimic not the art but the habits and manners of your elders, you won't get anywhere because they'll have snaffled all that up anyway. So you have to be inventive about things, but that's not to downplay the problems. I mean, student fees, debts are forcing people to work endlessly, and while they're at arts. Student fees are causing people to work all the time when they're at art school, when they should be not working, really, should be thinking, concentrating on their work. So all of those things, they are really problematic. I don't lessen that for a moment.
And in terms of then, I'm thinking about our next question here, and thinking about that sense of the times when you have taken steps to be collective as well, so work in the collective. And the question here from Sally Lemsford has come in by email and says, what difference do you think that the art party in Scarborough made, and could this happen more than once?
Yeah, the art party in Scarborough was really a magical sort of thing. It brought it brought nearly 2,000 people to Scarborough in the middle of November. And I think there are lots of things about it. One, it was in the north, which was good, and I think people. I do think, actually, I mean, I grew up partly in North Yorkshire when I was a child, and well, I'm really very much a Londoner, but I do think there's a kind of solidarity amongst people in the north, in Leeds and Newcastle and Manchester and stuff, which people understand in a different kind of way than from people in the southeast. So this idea that it was in the north was very important, and I do think it was. I do think it was a moment where everybody got together almost right at the beginning of the whole EBAC debacle to say this is completely wrong. Of course, it didn't change. It didn't change much, but it created a lot of solidarity. And I think people who attended it really loved it and thought it was interesting, because it was a bit of a mixture between a kind of political rally and a party and a art fair, and it was saying something that the arts are important outside of the London. I want to be a Turner Prize winner. I want to have a show at, I don't know, wherever that you want to have a show. It was outside of the gallery system and all of that. It was really very much a kind of art not for art's sake, but for the sake of arts kind of event. So, in a strange way, and then people have asked me, when's Art Party 2 happening? I think that's difficult to do. Partly it's difficult to do logistically, but it's also difficult to do in the same way that if you saw a band that you saw when you were a kid and they reformed, it's never the same. Like, in a way, like when I was at Reading Universities, the Sex Pistols played, and it was like one of those things. You're never going to recreate that, really. You can create something else. I mean, I think that's the challenge for people. Somebody else can create something else that's like that, and I'm keen to create events like that, work collectively, and I'd do something else like that, tomorrow if I could, if COVID-19 lifted off. But it wouldn't be quite like that. It was quite a special thing, and it was really to do with the people who came to it. It wasn't to do with organising it. There was a wonderful man there, Stuart Cameron, who ran the Crescent Art Centre. I think he's retired now, but he was, and I devised it, but it was really he who realised it, and so it's that kind of it's that kind of energy to do things that you need from curators and funders and all that sort of thing. And then also we had some quite big funders. The Art Fund got on board, and I know Artist Newsletter was involved, and so that was all, and DAX and all those people. So that was good. It was a good thing, but I don't think there'll be an Art Party 2, really. But there'll be another thing a bit like it at some stage.
I know I went to that in 2012, Bob, and brought lots of the ideas and the energy back from there into my organisation, and we've been producing works almost with that as a base for the last 7 or 8 years. So I wonder whether the momentum, which I guess is behind the questioner's question, is in all of the individuals and the collective enthusiasm that came out today.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good thing to say, actually, because a lot of people have said to me, well, that was that they've kind of been inspired by it in various different kind of ways. In a way, it goes back to the earlier question about ownership of these things. I don't really, it's a slightly self-defeating sort. I don't want to own the Art Party. The point about doing it was to say, look, you can do this, and you have done it. So And people do it in different ways in their organisations, don't they? And it may have nothing to do with the art party, but this sense of working with others. It reminded me, when I did the art party, I was thinking a lot about the first show that I organised called Something's Wrong, which was in a disused building, where we just got all our artists, mates together, and we made an exhibition, and that then became the beginning of all our career. And it's the same probably with Damien Hirst and all the Freeze exhibitions and all that sort of thing. Is that sort of sense of, well, let's just do it, decide that you're going to do it, try and find the funding, and but if you don't get the funding, still do it anyway. So it's that kind of energy, isn't it? And that exists. It's not unique to the art party.
Thanks, Bob, for that. A question that's come in from Jinuk Saka, who works at turf projects in South London. And she's asked, drawing from your lifetime of producing art, and now in the wake of Black Lives Matter, what advice might you give to artists in your position, particularly seen as a white man, working in the art world, to navigate their work meaningfully whilst being a proactive anti-racist ally?
Yeah, there's lots of things in that, isn't there? I mean, I think white male artists have been a bit like the grey squirrel over the years, and this idea of colonising things, it can happen with countries, it can happen with political ideas, it can happen with campaign. I think I really think art, your permission to talk about these things is really born out of your, in one sense you could say it's born out of your humanity, but it is born out of your sense to work and your own experience and your own sense of doing the work in order to be able to speak about the issues which you've been engaged with, or you have an understanding about, that you feel others might enjoy or should understand. And that's the same with looking at still life or making a political work. You've got to have done the work of looking and thinking about it, and also kind of have an angle on it that is, unique and interesting. Otherwise, you've got to be very, well, not careful, but, artists' voices are both about the things that they make, but it is also about who you are. And if as a white person you just see, it's good for you to be involved in this issue or something, it'll look well on you. That's not the way to get engaged in things. It really isn't, and people should stay out of it if it's only in those terms. I mean, I think it's different for lots of different people, and lots of different people have different kinds of experiences. But I mean, quite often in art school, other art students will say, "Why are you?" to other art students, they'll say, well, "Why are you making work about Palestine, or why are you making work about Trump? You have no experience of it." And in a way, as an adult, I think, yeah, that's right. But actually, if art students aren't going to make work about those issues, it's like, who is, So, so it's kind of, I mean, I know I'm being very humble and permissive in all of these answers to these questions, but I sort of think, I do sort of think it's kind of nuanced, really. But I do think the root of it all is about understanding a particular issue and having something unique to say about it, which is rare if you're a commentator, but really in your hands if you're a young black artist, and so that's in a way that's quite exciting. That's engaged in the particular struggle should make things about it. So I think that's quite important. I mean, I don't want to make loads of glib. I mean, people might accuse me of making lots of glib statements over the years, but I really don't want to do that. And okay, I mean, in my own efforts, I've made a couple of pieces. One that I'm very proud of, actually, which was this is to do with white privilege. I was asked to make a program for the BBC where we travelled all over the place. We went to America and Iceland, all sorts of different places, interviewing people about protest. And but one of the people I interviewed was this young Black Lives Matter protester called Blair Marnie. Well, Blair Marnie gave this amazing interview to me, where she told what happened to her the week before, basically. And in our program, we couldn't, just because the interview lasted about 15 minutes, it was all absolutely brilliant. We went on a journey from New York down to the south, where she had organised an event for Alton Sterling, who was murdered by the police, and then she was arrested. And anyway, this whole thing went on this great long journey, and but all we could do in the program was sort of summarise it and and show her talking about it. So I was given this transcription of her story, and I painted that transcription word for word, and then showed it at Hull City of Culture. We're going to show it next year at the Harris Museum in Preston. But I think the thing about that was that it was a kind of, that interview doesn't really reside anywhere else. It's only me doing it that meant that it could be there. But it's her story. It's absolutely her story. So all of these things, I think if you're a white person, you just have to, I think it's absolutely right that you should show solidarity with things, but you mustn't go in there and appropriate people's ears by the audiences. You can't hoodwink the audience that you're something that you're not. You just can't do that. It's not possible. It's not within your gift. It's not a thing that's possible. So people see things for what they are, and you just have to understand that. I don't know if that answers that question.
That does, Bob. Yeah, I think that sense of clarifying your own position in things, and again, stepping back, amplifying and making space for other people's voices, like you were discussing there, rather than appropriating it and centering yourself. It sounds, yeah. I have a question from Chloe Belcher, which is also, I think, my favourite question for today, because I think it's what I would be asking you if I was in charge of the questions. So Chloe says, if you were to send a letter to Michael Gove now, how would it be different in the present day to your previous letters to Michael Gove?
Oh, God, yeah, well, it's... Michael Gove is such a complicated individual. When I wrote the letter to him, I just saw him as a sort of a kind of hate figure, really, who was, I think, unwittingly actually destroying the arts in schools. But he was doing it because he wants everybody to understand maths and English, and he thinks that's the right way for their own advancement. And he's not wrong in thinking that. He has a particular journey as well. He's a adopted kid, and he was adopted into a conservative family. And I think he sees the Conservative Party as his mother, essentially. It's his it's his love, his great love of his life. But so there's something about, and also there's something about him that makes me think that he's a very conflicted and odd sort of person. When I stood against him, I had to spend a whole night, the election night, seeing him walk around the people doing the counting. There's piles of ballots came up for him and one or two for me. And but it was quite a strange presence, because his Conservative Party colleagues in the hall that night were like your classic kind of bastard conservatives. They were just whooping and hollering, and they were winning. They didn't think they were going to win that election. I mean, they were going to win Michael Gove's election, but they didn't think they would win against Ed Miliband. But they did win. So, and they were, and the head of the party was shouting over to me, "Come over here, Bob! You did really well. Let's have a whiskey." And I was like, "Oh no, not quite ready for that yet." But Michael Gove, they were all kind of really gun ho, basically. But Michael Gove was very uncomfortable amongst them, and it made me think he's quite a strange character. I mean, I don't know quite how to define it really. But my new letter to Michael Gove, if that's a really serious question, would be to say, Michael, get some help. You need to talk things through with an impartial, somebody impartial, some sort of therapist, and it will make you a happier person. That would be my real answer to him, because I think he's quite an odd, strange person, and he needs some support. I don't know, ramble, but yeah, get some help, mate.
Thanks, Bob. Just as an add-on to that time, I wondered what you thought about the perception of you from the media and the time they gave you, and how they engaged with what was really an important single issue that you were campaigning for, and often maybe you were cast in the joke candidate role, and I wondered how you coped with that.
Yeah. I mean, it was a serious campaign, but I did realize, I realized that, I was going to be labelled as the raving loony artist party or something, and I sort of knew that was going to happen. But what was very important to me was that at the hustings in Heath, is that I could sit next to him, and I always made sure I was sitting next to him, and I could turn to him and say, "You are the architect of the reason why, the people in this hall, their kids aren't studying the arts, they're not playing an instrument, and they won't be doing drama. And if they did those things, their school would be downgraded in the league tables." And you know what? Though all the conservatives, largely conservative people in that hall, they cheered me, and everybody wants their kids to study the arts. And so it was about that. It was about saying that to him in a way. So in a way, it was a kind of personal thing. I've been campaigning for the arts, and I just felt an election is a fantastic. I mean, I think really everybody should stand in elections, because it's interesting, and you really understand how politics works. They totally sew up the whole constituency, so that anything about, whether there's going to be a bypass built or whether you restaurant or something, you've got to talk to the Tory party, and the Tory party will listen to you if you're a Tory member or a councillor, and that's how they do it. And the Labour Party the same. You can talk to them if you're part of the party, if you like. And I hadn't really understood that about local politics, and it really opened my eyes to how. And the thing that I got that came out of it really is that I became an advocate of proportional representation after that, because I saw that the local Liberals and the Labour people and the Green Party, all those people, reasonable people, they were just closed out about any decisions about their area in a situation where you've got one party that's a very safe seat. And that made me think that's totally wrong. Even the bonkers UKIP people, they would not have been so vociferous had they not been shut out of politics in the way that they have been, because part of their steam would have been let off in the whole political process. So I mean, that's getting serious about that experience, but that's what really that's what I really got from it, actually. Oh, sorry, I didn't hear that.
Sorry, Bob. I think it's a huge subject, which could probably be a whole interview on its own. But
Yeah.
I think we're sort of coming to the end of our time. We've got maybe 2 or 3 questions to go, and
actually, right, yeah, that's the opposite of where we thought we were going to be. It's because I ramble on.
Oh no, it's
it's because also I'm really bad at seeing both sides of the argument. So
it's been fascinating and really really valuable.
Odd political person.
You're your own devil's advocate, Bob. But a really interesting question from Lee Clark, and it's something that we've talked a bit about in the project, is around this idea how art in this realm is often can be quite prescriptive in the way that it's delivered, and lots of people have asked us about whether an artwork itself can make change, and in a more traditional way, I guess. And Lee Clark has asked us, he said that he's interested in your new abstract works that seem to be a bit less public-facing and a bit more introspective. And do they still carry the concerns you have, but without using the text? Or are you a bit more concerned with the more formal issues of painting?
Well, I mean, I know this sounds totally counterintuitive for what I'm trying to do, but I do very rarely actually paint a call to arms. We must do this. It might be we must sanitize our hands before we go into shops. So it'd be nice to shopkeepers and things, but I'm not really a call to arms artist. A lot of the things that I do, I think, are kind of gentle provocations. Really, I see them in that light rather than a call to arms. So they're not really prescriptive. I would refute the idea that they're super prescriptive, because I don't. I'm not telling anybody to do anything. What I'm saying is that this is the case. If you like, I've got a load of these. I'll show you some of these slogans. Sitting in my shed. What I'm saying is, oh well, look, listen, make things. That is a call to arms. But all schools should be art schools. Is saying what is something that I think should be the case, if you like. It's not necessarily a kind of call to arms in that way. But with these kind of abstract things, I got interested in the idea of I've always been interested in colour. You can see that in even these slogan works. It's kind of playing around with colours to see what colour will do as a side, to not contradict, but just as another story going on within the paintings. And it's to do with reading, and I suppose this is getting more internalized, but it's to do with my childhood. I used to suffer from terrible childhood migraines, which were brought on by reading. And so I'd see these pages of text with bright colours swimming before me with kind of unbearable pain. But this idea of colour and it having a kind of psychological effect has been something that I've been interested in for a long time. But then I started making paintings because also I've been trying to make music. I'm a completely rubbish musician, but I love making music, and that's been a big part of my practice since I was a kid. And so trying to ally something about the musicality of colour and painting has been something that I've been interested in doing. And I think that is somehow, I see all of these things in a way, you could, in a way I think about sometimes the slogans that I paint as lyrics and the painting as the song or something. I think about them a little bit like that, and they all talk to themselves in different ways. And so those paintings are really more exploring that area. They're not really introspective. I want, in a way, we're doing this thing at the Harris Museum where we're going to have one section of it as a mini kind of art school. And in that section, I was thinking of exhibiting some of these paintings. I also have a book out called "You Are an Artist," where all those paintings, which has a lot of those paintings in it. And so the idea is to get people to explore ideas about colour and sound and rhythm and pace in the art school. So it'll be gently all about advocating the arts in the same way that everything else is, in a way.
Maybe the abstract works are like the album cover, Bob.
Yeah. Yeah, album covers. I mean, that's a generational thing, isn't it? There's books of album covers, you know.
Rach, it's I think your question.
Yeah, well, weirdly, it's me voicing your question, Glenn, which I can do, definitely. So one of the things that when Glenn and I were talking the other day, Bob, Glenn was wondering, what do you think about the phrase action, not protest? And is there a sense that protest is only a kind of means to an end? And that for some it appears to be the end in itself. So doing the protest or being involved in the protest is enough to feel like you're involved in change. So maybe it's just talking a little bit how you sit with those ideas around action and protest.
Yeah, I see the point in the question, but actually I don't think they're mutually exclusive. And I definitely do think action, doing things, looking at things, trying to sum up what they mean. Maybe that doesn't involve much action. Maybe it's just about looking, or listening. But I suppose in action we're thinking, kind of work on the ground kind of thing, other than just rhetoric. And I do agree with the question in that sense. But I do think as a kid, the action of organising the protest of Rock Against Racism and all that stuff, which was a lot of work to do, graft, but it did lead to protest. And those gigs, they led to Billy Bragg. Billy Bragg saw the Clash playing, and he thought, well, I could do that at Victoria Park. And I suppose there'll be a lot of others of us. And I was at the Rockwell Park thing, seeing Aswad and Elvis Costello. People put those on. I attended it just as a protester, or not really a protester, just showing solidarity with anti-racism. But somebody grafted to put all that on. So in a way, they're not mutually exclusive, action and protest. They are important. But I do I sense where that's coming from, the idea of just people spouting off about, and also received opinion. I think that's something to really avoid. If you've heard a slogan, really think about it and don't just repeat it. I did do a whole load of slogans once, which was I did this whole thing called the Apathy Workshop, and somebody came to me and said, we want you to do slogans with children. And I was like, well, that's not really what I'm about. And so we made all these slogans saying, beware people with slogans and banners. And, if you can't be bothered to do this, it's okay. So I do understand where that's coming from. Yeah. But I do think protesting is a very important human thing, and it's very it's obviously very important for people in like Hong Kong or in really appalling situations. People have to speak out, even if they perhaps have no agency in making change. They have to speak out. That's free expression, free speech. Don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, I think there's something very beautiful in that idea of protest being an action, and that taking energy and thought and all of those things. So yeah, great. Thanks, Bob. I think we're pretty much come to the end of our time, and we've come to our closing question. And it's a closing question that we're going to ask all of our interviewees. So thanks for getting us to this stage. It has been fascinating. Our closing question is, and your advice has been sought a couple of times earlier on, but in this sense, what would your words of advice be for artists who are seeking to make change?
I think it's about. I do think it's about. I do think it's about grassroots sorts of things, and there's always work for artists. And who's an artist? I don't know. I think you've got to. I'm very keen on the professional role of the artist, but actually, we're all human beings. We can all make art, and we can all affect change. And it might be. I think it. You know, I'm also a bit of a localist. I think it's important to make change that you can. You know, really, my understanding of these things is that do what you can is my and don't feel overawed or depressed because of things you can't change. What you are changing by engaging in art is free speech and human rights, and that activity of lots of people constantly engaged in that process, even if it's quite a solitary process and may not, create much obvious change. It's important. Making art is important because in the end, lots of people making art is lots of, in a way, kind of active resistance to going to work, and it's a kind of active resistance, a small act of resistance for the individual voice, if you like, and that's really important. So whatever it is, even if it's painting grey monochrome paintings, it's important to do it.
That feels like a really great place to end, Bob. Thank you so much. I think that idea, again, of like what those small acts of resistance are that we can engage in, is something that will speak to a lot of people as well. So thank you so much for being